What happens when a vintage tractor becomes the battleground for suburban supremacy? Join me as I challenge the authority of the HOA's reigning queen and redefine community standards. Before we begin today's deranged HOA story, tell me you haven't had your fill of irrational and power-grabbing HOA nonsense. Smash that like button to show you're on my side, and drop a comment if you've ever faced off against an overbearing homeowners association. Be sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell, because this saga's only getting crazier from here. There I stood, triumph pulsating in my chest, as the crowd gradually began to transform from mere spectators into an energized chorus of support. It was as though we were awakening from the slumber of conformity that Karen Blanchard had wrapped around our community like a suffocating shroud. I could see old Mr. Graverson's bobbing head among the throng, and I couldn't help but feel that his quirky lawn ornaments were suddenly no longer just dust catchers. They were now emblems of resistance against the trivial tyranny. Tractor chic was becoming a passionate battle cry. It made me chuckle at the sheer outlandishness of claiming tractor aesthetics as the next big neighborhood trend. I flashed a victorious grin at Max, who beat his fist against his palm as if calling for an encore of my whimsical speech. The comedic tension in the air was filling with a buoyant anticipation. Just as I was about to spiral into another mini-rant on the benefits of quirky local charm, Karen stormed back into the fray, brandishing her evidence like some self-important judge. "You think this is humorous?" she huffed in disbelief. The folder, which seemingly weighed her down with years of pent-up neighborhood grievances, was the last barrier between her draconian ideals and the uprising of free-spirited neighbors. "The number of complaints," she started, but before she could delve into her statistical tirade, I intercepted her with feigned interest. "Ah, yes, the illustrious collection of complaints. Tell us, Karen, does it come bound in leather and embossed with gold?" I couldn't help but punctuate my sarcasm with the faintest spin of my hand, inviting laughter, which erupted like popcorn in a microwave. As Karen's face reddened further, I could only assume my mocking had struck a chord. Perhaps I could feel the pendulum of perception shifting in my favor. But in a miraculous twist of fate, she pressed on. "These complaints are entirely justified, Riley. This flyer," she pointed at a hastily made document someone had obviously slapped together on a lunch break, "contains testimony from serious homeowners who find tractors noisy, distracting, dare I say, a nuisance." The last word was pronounced with the kind of dramatic flair that could have won her a spot on Broadway, or a sitcom about overzealous HOA boards. I countered, a smirk dancing on my lips. "Oh, come now, Karen. Is it the sound of the tractor that disturbs your peaceful slumber, or does it simply remind you that there's vitality beyond your gray-hued world? You know, fresh air and all that. Little things like happiness, neighborly warmth." I emphasized the last two words for added effect. The audience behind me erupted again, this time into a symphony of chuckles and light-hearted jeers directed toward Karen's comically exaggerated gloom. I looked out at my neighbors, a motley crew of faces that stretched all the way to Karen's garden, which was probably still orchestrated to the tunes of her overbearing design. It was glorious to imagine a time when we'd bring forth not just tractors, but finally, an embodiment of eccentricity back into our personal lives. More than the simple joy of a sunbeam on your face while catching up with neighbors, we were starved for the audacious spirit of community, creative expression, and individuality. I could almost hear the collective heartbeats of undiscovered whimsies coming back to life. Would we finally be free, one tractor at a time? And the moment felt transcendental as I glanced back at Karen, who was desperately trying to gather her composure. But the facade she had held with such tenacity was wearing thin, cracking like an overcooked bread crust. "This isn't about art or self-expression, you foolish dreamers," she flatly stated, missing the point entirely. I interjected, adding a pinch of playful sarcasm. "Oh, Karen, surely you're not one of those people who believes life is meant to be lived strictly within the lines of a coloring book. What magical life experience have you endured that gifted you the wisdom to stifle creativity?" I waggled my eyebrows, inviting them into my burgeoning world of imagination. With each exchange, I could feel spirited laughter tightening my bond with my neighbors, and I knew then that the waves of goodwill were beginning to wash over and drown out Karen's previous reign of terror. "So what if we allowed a few tractors to flourish?" I continued, pacing before the rapt crowd as if I were Billy Shakespeare, absconding with undisputed critiques of prejudice from his era. Save for my version included cows and tractors. Picture it. Vibrant tractors dotting the neighborhood, a whimsical gallery of farm life. This community could emerge as a bold emblem of creative joy. As gasps of enthusiasm wafted through the throng, I called out with genuine delight. We could even turn this into the new hotspot for influencers looking to grasp the beauty of genuine life, complete with tractors as the centerpiece. Can you fathom the social media frenzy? With the inspector nodding thoughtfully, as if he were mused by my visions, I saw Karen's eyes darting frantically for an escape route. In retrospect, it was downright pitiful how quickly she went from queen bee to queen who forgot her royal scepter. I roared with laughter, and the whole crowd echoed the sentiment. So Karen, consider this a potential turning point. The uprising begins today. Each nuisance you publish adds to the tapestry that is our community, and guess what? I declared with an exaggerated wink. I refuse to let your monochrome garden steal our beautifully vibrant spirit. Was it too dramatic? Perhaps. But it was working! The tide had indeed turned, and I reveled in the artistry of this rebel's anthem swelling around me. Could it be that we were embarking on a path of better days ahead, with more than just a tractor in our sights? As the murmurs of support began to transform into full-blown cheers, I felt a surge of righteous energy coursing through my veins. The atmosphere crackled with a newfound camaraderie among my fellow neighbors, and I couldn't help but revel in this moment of arm-in-arm rebellion against Karen's tyrannical governance. Her barbed comments about the evils of tractors had devolved into mere background noise, drowned out by the booming laughter and spirited discussions emerging from my audience. I glanced over at Max, who was practically bouncing on the balls of his feet, ready to charge into the fray as my trusty hype man. "It's a tractor revolution, baby! Just think of the possibilities!" he hollered, eliciting another uproar of giggles from the crowd. Because, after all, this wasn't merely about my beloved tractor anymore. Oh no, this was an awakening, a socio-agricultural renaissance. As I scanned the hopeful faces around me, I could see Karen's downward spiral quickening like a contemporary ballet in fast forward. Her perfectly coiffed hair seemed to dull as she absorbed the collective enthusiasm surrounding my farm-hued vision. I seized the moment, moving closer to the inspector, who appeared to be jotting down notes with an amused grin plastered across his face. Clarity struck. "Mr. Inspector," I called, "would you consider this wild surge of community support as evidence that tractor ownership should rightfully thrive amid our suburban garden paradise?" He nodded vigorously, seeming unconcerned with the chaos erupting behind him. Karen's incredulous expression was priceless. It was as if the realization that she was losing her grip sent her into a slight disarray. Her meticulously curated world of bland conformity quivered in the presence of my quirky brigade, armed with vintage tractors and eccentric garden sculptures. "You lot are being ridiculous," she stammered, flapping her folder like a bird trying to fly without wings. "This is about maintaining property values. You're all abandoning reason for the sake of, what, a few clattering tractors?" I spotted a pair of skeptical eyebrows belonging to Mrs. Jenkins from across the street, muscles tensed in silent contemplation. Did I detect the birth of an alliance? I utilized our neighbor's hesitation to my advantage, leaning into the mic like a gym instructor offering words of encouragement. "Property values, Karen? Please, even a lowly tractor brings charm and history. These machines are not just metal behemoths. They represent labor, resilience, and creativity." I gestured toward the children peeking out from behind adults, eyes wide with curiosity and excitement. "Look at these future farmers. With tractors in our community, we're planting the seeds of sustainability and creativity. Imagine them growing up with a respect for their land." My words hung in the air like sweet cotton candy, tantalizing and colorful enough to distract even the staunchest of critics. Shall we stifle their dreams in exchange for a cookie-cutter aesthetic? Is that how we cultivate future generations? The crowd erupted with enthusiastic nods, while Max, ever the Spitfire, amplified the connection, hollering, "We want the kids to grow up in a place that inspires innovation, not mediocrity. Who's with us?" A cheer rose as if from the depths of the earth itself, solid and infectious. Overzealous with newfound energy, I turned back to Karen, who now bore a look of sheer bewilderment. Gone were the sharp lines of superiority. In their place was disbelief, sprinkled with a hint of desperation. "Karen, do you even see what you're up against?" I couldn't resist a little theatrical flair, making it a layered jab. "Your reign is crumbling faster than a cheap set of garden flamingos." As she battled to regain her poise, I caught a flicker of despair, a crack in her armor. It was almost comical to witness this powerhouse of neighborhood bureaucracy transformed into a feeble figure, trying to wheedle her way back into the hearts of our neighbors, who were now feeling ever more emboldened. I could practically taste the sweet victory on the tip of my tongue as the inspector rose to his feet, all 5.5 feet of him standing proudly before the raucous crowd. "Given what I've seen today," he began, his voice calm and steady, "I believe the community demonstrates a strong desire to embrace cultural diversity, including tractor ownership. As per the regulations, you, Miss Grant," he gestured toward me, "have full rights to your tractor." The paradigm shift had officially commenced, with my tractor as the improbable hero, clad in rusty charm, riding forth into a kingdom freed from tyranny. My heart swelled with indescribable joy. Karen's mouth opened, then closed, resembling a fish out of water as she desperately attempted to suppress her disbelief. In that moment, I almost felt pity for her. After all, it must be exhausting juggling power, entitlement, and lack of genuine joy. But the warm swell of triumphant laughter and merry cheers from my neighbors drowned out her protests. I waved, grinning like an excited kid while the realization sunk in. What began as a simple disagreement over a tractor had metamorphosed into an empowering movement of creativity and camaraderie for our little neighborhood, and I morphed into its vibrant mouthpiece. Could this joyous posse of quirky neighbors finally be on the cusp of a brighter horizon together? As the raucous celebration unfolded around me, I felt like a gladiator stepping off the arena floor, victorious and utterly elated. My tractor, that humble yet heroic infrastructure of rural charm, seemed to glow under the warm light of the setting sun like some sort of agricultural trophy. The inspector's official ruling rang in my ears like a new symphony. Community diversity accepted in all its forms. I glanced back at the crowd, bursting with enthusiasm, and my heart swelled with gratitude. Neighbors who had previously clung to the sidelines now joined in, chanting support for my tractor with all the enthusiasm typically reserved for a championship sports team. It was a spectacle, a joyous and outrageous turning of the tides against HOA tyranny. My laughter mingled with theirs, an infectious melody of rebellion against bland suburbia. Then it struck me. Karen's fortress of entitlement was under siege, but her fiery attempts to run the battle were far from diminished. As I caught sight of her, she had exchanged her usual glasses of steel with a cocktail of barely disguised disdain and desperation. An ever-so-slight quiver betrayed her cool exterior as she attempted to corral the chaos. "You are turning the community into a laughingstock," she gasped, her voice reminiscent of a wounded animal, echoing through our makeshift amphitheater. I leaned in closer, fueled by my newfound warrior spirit, and blurted out, "At least we're laughing. What's funnier, tractors or your rules?" Oh, the sheer joy of watching her face transform from deep-seated indignation to sheer disbelief was a show worth every moment of a bygone HOA meeting. The cacophony around us grew louder, with piercing laughter and cheers breaking out like celebratory fireworks. It was like I had stumbled upon the greatest potluck of rebellion. "Ladies and gentlemen," Max bellowed, weaving through the crowd like some humorous bard, "who says we can't invite a little chaos into our lives? Raise your hands if you're with us." A dozen hands shot into the air, and I pinched myself. Was this truly happening? Karen looked both furious and hurt, akin to a ruler overthrown, and I couldn't help but relish the moment. The air buzzed with life, diversified with dreams infused, thanks to a tractor and a neighborhood no longer beholden to someone else's idea of how we should live. I thought to myself, how poetic that it would take the defiance of a single lawn ornament, tractor, to unite us all. With her face flushed, Karen finally regained a shred of her composure and stepped forward, clutching her notes like a shield. "If this is about tractors," she spluttered, "what's next? Chickens? Cows in our yards? You'll turn the entire neighborhood into a farm." The crowd erupted in laughter again, but there was an underlying current of seriousness there too. Her sarcasm masked a genuine fear of losing control, and I suddenly realized that I was no longer battling just for my tractor. I was standing up for a change that could unlock the door to freedom of expression for everyone. "Well, Karen, if we must have chickens and cows, let's at least make room for bunnies and bees." I shot back cheekily, my words sending waves of laughter cascading even higher. Someone in the back shouted, "I want a goat," as the momentum continued to spiral into joyous mayhem. Feeling like a metaphorical conductor overseeing an orchestra of chaos, I glanced sideways where the inspector stood, shaking his head with a smile. "I never thought I'd witness such passionate discussions on property values," he murmured, a glimmer of amusement dancing in his eyes. It was exhilarating, the chaos swirling around us, but there was purpose layered beneath the humor. This wasn't just neighborly bickering. It was a manifesto for personal expression, a rallying cry against the absence of character in our community. Perhaps it also served as a reminder that we couldn't let others dictate our values and identities. regardless of how power-hungry they might be. Cheers to a community that embraces its quirks, I shouted out, holding my imaginary glass aloft. The chorus of voices echoed my sentiment, until it felt like we were celebrating not just the victory of my tractor, but a blossoming renaissance. Just then, the unmistakable sound of a small, revving engine echoed through the crowd, cutting through the laughter and cheers. A perplexed silence settled in as a rambunctious group of children sped around the circle on toy tractors, the kind that were jingling with colorful lights and giggles. "Look, Karen, all hail the future farmers." I couldn't help myself. Throwing my head back, I laughed as if this was all part of a perfectly scripted comedy. Her eyes darted back and forth, desperately trying to regain that iron fist of control, while I reveled in the moment. If she thought this minor rebellion was a fluke, she had another thing coming. These children and their playful mimicry of adult absurdities would remind her daily that the heart of our community was fueled by spirit, joy, and yes, the occasional tractor. As the laughter echoed into the evening, I secretly vowed to turn this victory into a delightful tradition. "Every tractor-loving neighbor unite," I shouted with fervor. "From this day onward, let's gather every month for a Tractor Friends potluck. Bring your quirky garden sculptures, wildflower bouquets, and who knows, maybe even a chicken or two for fun." The affirmation that resonated from the crowd was deafening. With every nod and cheer, I could almost see a new vision for our neighborhood take shape. Creative expression flourishing amidst regulations, as our laughter wove itself into the very fabric of suburban life. Who knew what other rebellions might sprout from this joyful sowing? My tractor, once deemed a nonconformist eyesore, had sparked not just a battle but a revolution of the heart, and for that, I was eternally grateful. Our quirky collective spirit was alive and kicking, ready to sow the seeds of change, and anywhere that takes root will be my proud new frontier. Was I ready to take on the winds of absurdity that swirled in our neighborhood? You bet I was. The morning had a crisp quality to it, the kind of freshness that invigorated the soul and whispered promises of a productive day. My trusty tractor gleamed in the sunlight, a sturdy steed ready for the day's agricultural adventures, or at least the gardening projects I had planned. Just as I was about to take my first sip of coffee, savoring the moment of rural bliss juxtaposed against my suburban surroundings, in she marched. Karen Blanchard, the notorious HOA enforcer draped in her signature blouse and high-waisted skirt. Radiating righteous indignation like a poorly filtered Instagram influencer, she approached my front yard as if it were a battleground, and she, its fearless commander. The clipboard clutched in her hands was her sword, and she wielded it with dire pomp and circumstance. "Good morning, Riley," she exclaimed, her tone dripping with faux cheerfulness, which I knew to be a warning sign. "I just wanted to discuss that, vehicle." She gestured toward my tractor as if she were conveying a serious public safety hazard rather than my beloved vintage machine. "It's really not appropriate for the neighborhood, you know. It's an eyesore. It's practically a crime against property values." My coffee mug nearly slipped from my hands as I processed her outrage. I wanted to roll my eyes so hard they fell right out of my head, but I settled for a bemused grin, having encountered her over-the-top antics before. Did she genuinely think my beautiful, battered tractor was a flaming skull on the lawn? Or did she perhaps look into her glittering blue eyes and see a potential nightmare scenario staring down the barrel of a tractor? "Karen, first off, it's not a car, it's a tractor," I responded, my voice tainted with the sweetness of sarcasm and tinged with annoyance. "And unlike your judgment, which is purely subjective, this is a classic piece of farming equipment. It brings joy to my life, a size 12 bouquet of rebellion planted right in the middle of my lawn." I waved my arms theatrically, ready to draw attention to what truly mattered. Let's not forget, half the neighborhood has yard ornaments that look like a kaleidoscope of bad decisions. My tractor isn't even the worst offender. If I were a Hollywood actress, I would be demolishing the fourth wall right about now, inviting gasps and applause for my impassioned speech. But alas, it was just Karen and me, the steady drip of her judgment and my simmering defiance creating a delightful tension that was dizzying in its audacity. "It's not about the tractor itself, Riley. It's about maintaining the community standards," she huffed, arms crossed defiantly, her cheeks growing rosy with indignation. Oh, community standards. There it was, the phrase that wraps itself around conflict like a noose, designed to suffocate joy and creativity at the hands of entitlement. I imagined her at a board meeting, debating the merits of floral patterns versus mom's homesteading ideals, blissfully unaware that real community spirit grew in the garden, not constrained by the rigid confines of her yellowing notebook. Just as my internal monologue was reaching a climax worthy of Shakespearean drama, Max sauntered over, his tousled hair bouncing with his characteristic easy charm. "Hey Karen, how's the Battle of the Overseers going?" he called out, leaning casually against the fence, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Did you check out Riley's tractor yet? I heard it's winning some top awards at the local farmers market. Best in show, even." The corner of my mouth twitched upward. Ah, the virtue of humor. If only Karen could take a breather and join the spirited human experience, instead of being the stoic arbiter of suburban serenity. "Max," she snapped back, undeterred by his mirth. "This is serious. We can't let anyone think they can flaunt the rules just because they own a tractor." While she gesticulated beneath the rising sun, I stood rooted in place, feeling like a gladiator in a Roman arena, ready to fight to the end for my right to exist free of judgment, a noble quest against the crusade of micromanagement. In that moment, I felt it rising within me, the power of standing my ground. This wasn't just a territorial spat, it was about defining who I was in this town. "Karen," I rallied, cutting in with more energy than I'd anticipated. "This isn't an eyesore, it's a statement, a rather fashionable one if you ask me. What's next? Ban the lawn gnomes?" That was it. The mounting absurdity surrounding our little skirmish woke the full dramatic stock within me, cravings for triumph sprouting anew. I could sense Max's laughter bubbling beneath the surface, and my spirit lifted by the camaraderie I shared with him. "Do you really want to take on gardening gnomes, Karen? Because I suspect they might actually pummel the property values more than my tractor. Plus, their hats are decidedly out of code." If the HOA had a dramatic infraction meter, I was surging upward with every sarcastic quip. Just then, a city inspector's truck pulled into the cul-de-sac, and a spark of hope ignited my otherwise swirling mind. This was my chance. Perhaps some common decency and a touch of logic would prevail. Perhaps I wouldn't be alone in this battle against the absurdity of Karen and her rigid golden rulebook. After all, isn't fighting for fairness fundamentally human? Wouldn't it be a joy to see my tractor celebrated rather than derided? As the city inspector's truck rumbled to a stop, the drumming of my heart drowned out the cacophony of Karen's shrill declarations. Her bluster had been monumental, but I could see a flicker of uncertainty dance through her rigid facade like a candle, struggling against the winds of change. Did she seriously think she was about to send my tractor into tractor purgatory? I could already imagine my farming buddy standing atop my dignified machine, wearing a crown made of garden hose as a show of protest against the tyranny of HOA edicts. Max leaned over the fence, his mouth merely holding back laughter, but his eyes sparkled with mischief. This was our moment. "Hey Riley, if the inspector writes you a ticket for being too fabulous, I say we flaunt it," he chirped with a grin that stretched wide enough to split his face. Just as I scoffed, a sense of ambition washed over me. This was my chance to summon the spirit of suburban justice. The inspector stepped out, equipped with a notepad and a look of mild curiosity that suggested he was not beholden to the petty squabbles of the HOA. He was your classic civil servant type, clad in khaki shorts, with a Hawaiian shirt, practically shouting that he was there for a good time, definitely not for any drama club auditions. "So, what seems to be the issue here?" he asked, tilting his baseball cap back with a lean versus the horizon. It was the kind of question I'd been dreaming of answering. The stage was set for activism to flourish amid the weeds of judgment. I launched into a monologue worthy of Broadway, theatrically gesturing toward my tractor, proclaiming, "Sir, this glorious machine is not just metal and paint. It embodies the spirit of agricultural tradition, an aesthetic dreamscape in this cookie-cutter cul-de-sac." Sure, I sprinkled in some drama, but hey, this was my chance to shine in front of an audience less fixated on their own self-importance and more on the good old heart of community. In stark contrast to Karen's pompous assertions, I watched as the inspector's brow furrowed in genuine contemplation, a sure sign that reason might refute the HOA's high-handedness. "Now, ma'am, please understand I'm not here to pick sides, but your tractor is indeed labeled as farm equipment." "Oh yes, music to my ears." The words danced joyfully in my head, urging my confidence onward. I imagined Karen's head spinning, her face pale as if she'd gazed into the proverbial abyss. My tractor had flummoxed her. Every inch of it, gnarled and glorious, shot straight through the heart of her snobbery. As the inspector jotted down notes, Karen began to sputter like a tea kettle set too high, her indignation bubbling. "But it's ruining property values," she shrieked, clutching her clipboard as if it were a life raft in a sea of chaos. Worthy of a reality show, this spectacle was OA Horror Stories, starring Karen and a farmer in flannel. Property values, schmobberty values, Karen. I impudently shot back, my one-liners seeming to zing through the air like popcorn kernels set alight. People value vibrancy. You and your beige wallpaper can shrivel alongside the lifeless state of your potted plants. And there it was, a cheeky spark of inspiration ignited within me. I stood a little taller, arms crossed defiantly. Each breath became my battle cry against the oppressive regime she spewed forth. The inspector raised an eyebrow, likely amused but suppressing a chuckle, while I launched into my grand thesis on the importance of community spirit, one nourished not by pristine lawns but by warm, joyful heartbeats thriving in creativity. I could practically taste victory, like caramel popcorn at an amusement park, so close, tantalizingly near. Despite her increasingly jittery demeanor, Karen was not about to take this defeat lying down. With all the bluster and decorum of a soap opera villain, she thrust herself to the forefront, pointing furiously toward the inspector, as if he, not I, had steamrolled her delicate vision for suburban civility. "You just wait! This isn't over, Riley! I will take this complaint to the board. They won't let you flaunt your tractor, trust me." The winds that whispered through the trees carried her tantrum into the ether while I refrained from rolling my eyes so hard they got stuck in the back of my head. Did she not comprehend the weight of her words? "Karen, darling," I replied with mock sweetness, "if the board wants to take on the battle of the titans, pitted against my charming vintage tractor, may the odds be ever in their favor." Before I could pack away my booming sense of victory, the inspector ceased his scratching, the tension thickening like a cloud of ripe storm predictions. "Now, let's not escalate this further," he interjected with a soothing tone that radiated logic. "I believe we can find a common ground that respects both your tractor and the aesthetic standards." His eyes softened, revealing just how utterly absurd this narrative had become. Whatever those may be, behind him, Max was nearly doubled over, muffled laughter slipping through like a sneeze in a library. Karen's eyes bulged behind her glasses. She now realized she was battling not just an agrarian enthusiast, but the absurdity of her own entitlement. When she finally realized that an actual community thrives on diversity, rebellion, and the practical joys of tractors. Would this be the end of her reign of excessive micromanagement, or was that merely wishful thinking cresting like an unuttered prayer? My metaphorical boxing gloves were on, ready for the next round. As I stood amidst the swirling maelstrom of HOA drama, with sunlight glinting off my trusty tractor like a knight's armor, the scene began to feel surreal, as if I were the protagonist in a sitcom that had gone awry. Karen's face was a study in incredulity, her mouth opening and shutting like a fish out of water, but that only stoked the fire in my belly. Who would have thought the struggle over a vintage tractor would morph into a full-fledged showdown, the rural rebels versus the suburban snobs? "This is not just about a tractor, Karen," I called out, tossing my hair over my shoulder like a dramatic actress. "This is about the right to express ourselves in our backyards, to cultivate a community richer than just lawn gnomes and beige paint." I waved my arms like a conductor orchestrating a symphony of rebellion, reveling in the absurdity of it all. The inspector, perhaps starting to feel like an unwitting referee in this clashing garden of ideologies, adjusted his baseball cap and stepped between us as if ready to break up a game gone rogue. All right. Let's just pump the brakes a bit, folks. We all want what's best for this community, right?" he squeaked, trying to diffuse the tension while maintaining the precarious balance of sanity. Max was practically rolling on the ground now. I could see the warm glow of camaraderie erupting in his eyes as he desperately covered his mouth to stifle his laughter. "Seriously, if this drama escalates any further, we could turn this into a reality show. Beneath the bloated HOA, a tale of tractors and tyrants. You could be the headliner, Karen," he shouted, punctuating his words with spectacular hand gestures, making Karen's eye twitch harder than a cat trying to bat a laser pointer. With the inspector standing firm like a peace treaty between two feuding factions, there was a palpable shift in the room as a chorus of nearby neighbors emerged from their homes, drawn by the mayhem that unfolded in front of their very lawn. "Team Tractor!" shouted one brave soul, raising a fist in solidarity as if he had just been a part of the greatest unexpected rebellion since the American Revolution. The ripple of approval surged through the crowd, and I thought I might float directly into the clouds of righteous indignation. "You tell her, Riley! This is about freedom!" another echoed, energizing me to strap on my metaphorical boots and finish this fight once and for all. I could barely contain my cheeky grin while I turned back towards Karen, who was frantically swiping at her phone, clearly concocting her next zinger to hurl back into the fray. "Now, Karen, darling," I said, reaching for the dramatic flair that had already started this wild ride. Why not take this opportunity to embrace change? Have you ever thought that your rules might be, well, a little outdated? Like your hairstyle? I couldn't help but revel in the absurdity of my own words, but also had to admit that the thought of Karen sporting an edgy new look, hair flowing freely as she fought against oppressive styles of haircuts, brought a teasing smile to my face. I turned to the inspector, sporting a grin I would classify as cutesy yet mischievous. You'd think someone in charge of making our communities look proper would know that every now and then, a little wildness can uplift the atmosphere. The laughter and cheers from the gathered neighbors echoed off the houses dotting the street, seemingly igniting Karen's agitation further, her face now resembling one simmering on the edge of explosion. The inspector, for what it's worth, seemed to be holding a silent cheerleading session, his smile threatening to break the official demeanor plastered on his face. But it was seriously hard to stay stony-faced when presented with the likes of this spectacle unfolding. You know, I think the rule on farm equipment could be applied loosely here. While I get it might not fit the conventional suburban checklist of keep it clean and dull, I do see merit in supporting the community that promotes self-expression, he posited, gesturing toward my gleaming tractor as if it were an exhibit in a fine art gallery. Suddenly, my heart fluttered with a mixture of hope and audacity. Could I actually pull this off? Were we genuinely about to roll back the insufferable bureaucracy of the HOA? My inner rebel was practically bouncing off the walls of my optimistic soul. Just then, Karen's indignant gasp sliced through the glee emanating from us all, turning her visibly red from sheer exasperation. You can't seriously be considering this. There's a reason we have rules. She clutched her clipboard defensively, her fragile grip on power shattering like glass. This is about preserving property values. We can't have people thinking they can just. She flailed her arms wildly, desperately searching for a term that equated my beloved tractor to gas guzzlers or ugly lawn ornaments. But my sudden spirit seemed unstoppable. Preserving property values? I argued, stifling the urge to guffaw. What about preserving people's right to live authentically? Isn't that the ultimate value? Together we can break free from homogeny. I bet you'd be the first to warrant a portrait on the HOA wall of shame. The crowd erupted once more, and I swear I could almost hear the cartoonish sound of Karen's mental gears grinding to a halt. Would I finally have victoriously outmaneuvered the looming giant of Karen Blanchard and her suffocating HOA supremacy? The inspector looked between Karen and me, as if he were weighing the conflicting sides of a cosmic tug of war, before sinking his pen back into his notepad. All right, everyone, here's the deal, he announced, his voice commanding yet lighthearted, like a coach breaking the tense silence before a big game. I will be writing a recommendation to the HOA based on community input about allowing a select few pieces of agricultural equipment within certain guidelines, but we must also set up a community discussion to draft these new guidelines cohesively. A blast of cheers erupted. The triumphant sounds of victory were better than any symphony I'd ever heard. Sure, it wasn't a definitive win just yet, but the tides were turning, and the power of the people was beginning to swell against the tyrant of Karen. With that thought igniting my heart, I still had a gasp of disbelief lingering at the back of my throat. Could my tractor and the truths of my farming dreams finally bask in the warm sunlight of suburban acceptance? The crowd buzzed with excitement, and I felt a rush of adrenaline that transformed my earlier fears into vibrant energy. People were genuinely rallying behind me, emboldened by the inspector's unexpected turn in favor of tractor rights. Community input on agricultural equipment, I thought, chuckling at the absurdity of it all. Who would have ever guessed that my battle over a vintage tractor would culminate in an HOA committee discussing guidelines? As the murmurs of approval rippled through the neighbors, I caught Max's wide grin across the crowd. He gave me a thumbs up, his eyes practically twinkling with mischief, a silent agreement that we were resurrecting the very spirit of rural tenacity against the formidable city witch, Karen. Karen's expression was the icing on this absurd cake, a cocktail of righteous indignation and annoyance. "This isn't over, Riley," she barked, lowering her printed rules like a sword ready to issue the next decree. If her gaze could burn, well, my tractor would be melting, and I would be seen as a pile of smoldering ashes. The hilarious irony of it all wasn't lost on me. Here she was, clutching her HOA code like a lifebuoy in a tumultuous ocean while I boldly fought against the tide of ludicrous restrictions with a tractor as my emblem of freedom. I feigned a theatrical gasp and batted my eyelashes melodramatically. "Oh, Karen, please. It's almost cute how serious you are about your rules. But we'll be drafting guidelines more inclusive of creativity and personality, right, Inspector?" "Community discussions are the next steps, Karen," the inspector chimed in, clearly reveling in the spectacle unfolding before him. He was backing me, and that felt like nothing short of a miracle. It was as if this ordinary man had donned superhero tights, standing up to the HOA villain. I certainly was living in the most entertaining episode of my life. So, perhaps, I continued, cherishing the spotlight, you should brace yourself for some interesting debates and conversations. Who knows? You might even learn a little about embracing non-conformity, something like, say, colorful flowers, innovative lawns, and yes, I paused for dramatic emphasis, tractors. The crowd erupted in laughter, and I couldn't help but revel in every moment, wiping away any remnants of doubt. But Karen wasn't ready to surrender her strongly held ideals without a fight. You think you're winning? She shot back, her voice a blend of petulance and anger. This community was built on rules. I'm just protecting our property values. The way she clung to that final sentence made me want to play the world's tiniest violin just for her sake. Property values? Oh, please. I wanted to burst out with a laugh, but instead, I leaned forward, voice dripping with exaggerated sincerity. Oh, darling Karen, let me remind you, property isn't just about bricks and paint. It's about people thriving. If we want to maintain the property values we all cherish, shouldn't we honor the spirit of the land too? I gestured emphatically to the sprawling fields beyond us, where the sun set over the horizon like a whimsical painting that wouldn't leave the HOA's checklist untouched. The crowd cheered, and I felt nearly invincible. Karen, however, looked like a perplexed cat caught in a corner, her next line of resistance rapidly deflating. Her flustered demeanor was as comical as it was dramatic, and I savored every second of it. One more thing to consider, Karen, I added, allowing mischief to lace through my tone. People might prefer a dose of eccentricity over a monochromatic parade of strip malls. Imagine if your property values improved significantly simply by allowing a few whimsical tractors. Just think of the trends we could set, tractor chic instead of boring beige. I could hardly contain the laughter bubbling within me, and my neighbors joined in, rallying further against Karen's unyielding grasp on conformity. Just then, I spotted the faint outline of a well-known resident slipping away from their bushy hedges, a neighbor who'd always tried to stay out of the HOA's disputes. Mr. Plent Graverson, a longtime resident and collector of quirky lawn ornaments, was nodding enthusiastically, and I seized the moment. See, even the quietest among us have opinions. Let's be the change we wish to see, people, I announced, thoughts racing as I envisioned how wonderfully colorful this community could become, a fundraising event for lawn decorations, lawn art competitions with tractors as the centerpiece, and evenings of fun, vibrant gatherings celebrating our glorious quirks. As I basked in the sunshine of camaraderie, I saw a look of retreat wash over Karen's sharp features. The tension in her shoulders, the arch of her back, it transformed before my eyes like a deflating balloon. So let me remind you, Karen, some of us dream of making our little corner of the world more vibrant, liberating it from the monochrome prison of rules. I practically sang, my voice echoing with delight. It was an exhilarating charge to see my neighbors whispering excitedly among one another, warming to my ideas about farming gear and how it could symbolize diversity, resilience, and above all, community spirit. Surely, we could not lose to the rigid mindset of a Karen masquerading as a monarch. Wouldn't this battle become a story for the ages, an ongoing legacy of color versus black and white? What more could I dare to dream about in a community pushed awake from the dreariness of HOA norms? Thanks for sticking around with me through the chaos to the end. Want more high-stakes HOA drama? Check out our recent HOA clash with the video on the right, or let YouTube pick your next wild ride with the video on the left. Whichever way you go, buckle up. There's plenty more HOA insanity on the way. Tune in again for more HOA chaos.